Well, shifting focus from that and leading into this discussion now, we're going to be joined, or we're now joined by JP Landman. He's a political and trend analyst, and really keen to hear his thoughts on that. JP, good morning to you. Before we kick off our discussion, something actually came to mind. It was based on some of your, the previous talks that I've watched you do. That it's very easy to find negative headlines around South Africa. So if you actually do a quick Google search, I just want to let you know what I came up with. It was, South Africa, rising debt, no growth, no jobs, or South Africa faces economic and political collapse by 2030. You've highlighted that there are about 3 game changers in terms of sectors that the South African government can focus on. So you speak about energy, spectrum, as well as infrastructure. I'm not sure if you heard what Michael was saying around the reforms that are currently, being tabled or in place, and that they're not addressing some of the key issues such as segregation. In your view, would you agree with that, or are you saying that maybe there are actually some green shoots and reforms is slow, but we are seeing some concrete evidence there?
Good morning to me, and thank you that I can be with you again. I heard the last part of Michael's talk, and you were very, very privileged to have him. He's an outstanding South African, and he knows his topic really, really well. I quite agree with him that the segregation issue is not officially on the table. It's not a high priority. But I think 2 things to the counter of that. The first one is the best way to overcome the segregation in our society is to have much higher levels of economic growth. And really, the empirical evidence is all over the world. You can just look at South Korea, you can look at China. In all high growth countries, it becomes possible to do a number of things. And one of them is to overcome segregation. Here in the suburb in Johannesburg, where I live in Melville, it's noticeable in the last 5 years or so how much more mixed, how much more integrated it has become. The restaurants, the bars that I like to go to, and so on. So I think there is a natural evolution that way, and it's being carried by the fact that people have better jobs, they have better incomes. In general, there's more wealth. So I think Michael's statement is perhaps a little bit apocalyptic, but it is correct that the segregation issue is not on the table. I agree with that part of the statement. But I also think he will agree with me that it is much more important now for the country. Apart from overcoming COVID, it is much more important now for the country to get growth going again so that we have more money for education, for health, for all the other good things that we want to do.
So in terms of some of the reforms that the government has put forward, as you've said, maybe things like segregation, there aren't any explicit documentation or plans around it. But what we have seen in terms of the reform agenda, are you happy with where we are?
Oh, I'm very happy. And the president yesterday afternoon in Parliament, in his budget vote speech, once again repeated the importance of structural reforms to get the economy going. You can go and look on page 10 of his speech. It makes it very clear the only way to put South Africa on a new growth trajectory is to do the structural reform that we should have done a long time ago. And what do we talk about when we talk structural reform? Well, we talk electricity. We all know what's going on there and how the country has been hamstrung by the lack of energy security. Secondly, we talk spectrum. I don't think I have to motivate much around that. And thirdly, to me, infrastructure. If you go through South Africa, particularly rural areas, and you see the condition of roads, you go to many of our schools where there aren't proper latrines and ablution facilities, and the list really goes on and on. There's a lot of infrastructure that need to be fixed in South Africa, and those are the 3 things the president focuses on, or that the government is focusing on. There's also a 4th one, which is called public employment. And what is public employment? Do not confuse it with civil servants. The program that the president announced in October last year was to employ 800,000 young people at a stipend of 3,500 rand a month. That is called public employment. Now, 3,500 rand a month may not be a lot to the people in this webinar, but if you earn nothing and you've got no income, then to get 3,500 rand for 3 years, that's how long this program will run, it is quite a big difference that you make in the lives, not just of the 800,000 people you employ, but also their families. This program is running strongly. Of those 800,000 jobs, if I can call them that, 300,000 are in education as teachers' assistants, as janitors, and as cleaners in schools. Now, all those things are essential, and it's good that we tackle them. So 800,000 jobs is not going to move the dial on South Africa's unemployment numbers. The unemployment numbers, as you know, are quite horrific. But you have to start somewhere, and I think that's a good start. It's a kind of almost a subsidiary measure. The main thing is to get the economy on a new growth trajectory, and there I think energy, spectrum, and infrastructure are the key levers.
JP, getting the economy and staying on the on the right growth trajectory is very important. I just want to read something that you've written. You said one needs to distinguish between what the state is doing and what the ANC is or isn't doing. And you said that President Ramaphosa has clearly put the state on a new trajectory, and it's important that the ANC actually follows suit on this. So I think the question then becomes, what is, or how do you believe that President Ramaphosa's position within the ANC has been solidified? I mean, does he have the political sway? There have obviously been a lot of commentary around whether or not he will be able to enact some of these reforms. Maybe again, dispelling some of those big headlines around whether or not we actually have, a stable leadership within the ANC.
Yeah, to me, that quote that you have read from is what I wrote in August last year when I made a summary of all the anti-corruption actions that have taken place. And that was done by the government by August last year. It's now May. It's now about 8 months later. See how things have accumulated. In March this year, we got the ANC's step aside ruling. And although it's a little bit like pulling hen's teeth, some people are resisting and fighting back and so on. But in general, that train of stepping aside is moving forward. More and more people every week you see are kicked out of meetings or leave meetings. Supra Mahumapela, the former Premier of the Northwest, on Friday, I think, was asked to leave a meeting in Parliament because he has to follow the step-aside rule. So Mr. Ramaphosa's position, if you look at what's happening on the ground, is I think is unassailable. ACE is doing him a huge favor with his outrageous behavior. No, I think all those people who predicted that Mr. Ramaphosa will be a one-term president and that he won't survive next year in 2022 and so on and so forth, I think they've got to swallow a few words. Mr. Ramaphosa, if his health lasts and nothing happens to him, will do 2 terms, which means he will conclude 11 years. And in those 11 years, I think he will put South Africa on a very, very different path. Just look how far he's come in the 3 years that he has been president, and 2 years, 18 months really, since he was elected. So, yeah, no, I'm very happy with his political position. Can I just say this? I think there's some Nobel Prize for literature that must go to the newspaper who wrote President Ace Magashula. Look at him now. Sorry.
Okay, we'll move on swiftly from that. I think one of the other pressing issues in South Africa, and one that obviously gets South Africans very heated and rightly so, is the issue around corruption. So perhaps maybe just give us some context around what was the mission, what was the Zondo Commission actually supposed to do. So a lot of us are sitting, waiting, hoping to see people in those orange jumpsuits and some handcuffs coming up soon, and nothing seems to be happening. And you think it's a lot of money that the taxpayer has had to give. Maybe some context around that. Is there something that we're missing here?
Well, look, first of all, the Zondo Commission is highly profitable. It has cost the taxpayer so far R1 billion, with a little bit more money to come. McKinsey has repaid so far 1.87 billion rand. I would say directly as a result of the publicity of the Zondo Commission. Deloitte has repaid something like 270 million. So I think the Zondo Commission is bringing in much, or has already brought much more money back into the public domain than what it is costing the public domain. So I think that deals with the cost issue. If you look at what the Commission was supposed to achieve, they were supposed to achieve precisely what they're doing: expose the truth to South Africans. That's it. The Zondo Commission is not a prosecutor. It's not supposed to charge people. It's supposed to expose what has happened and expose the extent of state capture. And I think they're doing a sterling job on that. The next step is now for the National Prosecuting Authority to take that information and proceed with criminal prosecution. But to me, on this point, let me just say this thing. I think what we as South Africans miss is that the National Prosecuting Authority consists of different divisions. One of them is the prosecuting arm, but another one, which is now prosecuting Mr. Zuma. But another arm is the SIU, the Special Investigative Unit. And there's not a week that goes by that the SIU doesn't freeze some assets somewhere belonging to somebody. They have already frozen and taken back into the fiscus literally billions of rands. Now, this is not a criminal process. This is civil action, but it's working. It's working because people who looted now get their comeuppance. So we mustn't get carried away by this thing that justice is only done when somebody is in orange overalls. Criminal cases are difficult. For example, people forget that there's no such an offense in our law as state capture. You can't prove state capture. What you have to prove is fraud. What you have to prove is bribery. What you have to prove is corruption, as defined in legislation. So just to say there's state capture, and now people must be in orange uniforms, is quite frankly not to understand the law. We see with Mr. Zuma how difficult prosecutions are. We also see it with Marcus Jooste. You know, the Germans clapped him the first time, I think it was in 2017. That's now, 4 years ago. And the Germans they're on the verge of trialing him, but it hasn't been confirmed yet. Now, from that, you can make only one of two conclusions. Either the Germans are bloody inefficient, or Mr. Jooste is not guilty. You know, criminal trials are difficult, which doesn't mean you mustn't pursue them. But in the meantime, let's open our eyes to what's happening on the SIU front, where there's, as I say, every week there are reports of people getting clapped because they've stolen money.
On the topic, and I want to just latch on something that you said there around opening our eyes. We have the municipal elections that are coming up in October, I think, and in 2024 we've got the general elections. Maybe on the municipal elections first, before we go on to the general elections, we have different models that have been put into place in order to enhance the efficient running of municipalities. I mean, service delivery continues to be an issue, especially if you're not living in the big metros. We had the back to basics model. I think that was put forward by Mr. Pravin Gordhan. And at the moment, I think we've got the district working model, which the DA seems to think that now needs to be rejigged because it's looking to be centralized. Again, help us cut through some of this noise and maybe your thoughts on what is currently being done at a municipal level in order to get, service delivery to our people.
Look, as you know, local government in South Africa is a complete mess. And there are a number of reasons for it. One is we're paying the price of many, many years of excluding people from education, but also excluding people from experience. So there's a long history here that we cannot just ignore. Secondly, the structure of local government is very, very complex and sophisticated. We copied it from the Germans. Now, the Germans are the Germans, we South Africans. It is inherently a difficult structure to run. But I must say, and so there's severe problems. And there's no shortcut here. You just have to work through it and build capacity over time. Look at China. In China, the mayors of big cities and what we would call the city managers are appointed centrally from Beijing. None of this nonsense of choosing local people. Now, that's not the South African model. Our model is democracy. Local people choose their leaders. That is the route we've chosen. We didn't choose the China route. Having chosen that route, we must now work through it and develop the capacity. I think it is important for people in the webinar to just realize that about 80%, roughly, of South Africa's GDP are produced in municipalities which are more or less functional. I live in Johannesburg. Johannesburg is really not a well-run city. But we plod along. We plod along. And that applies to, I think, the municipalities where 80% of GDP is generated. So I feel very sorry for the people in Botawil, and I feel very sorry for the people in Koster, and even for a regional hub like Bethlehem or Harry Smith. But what we find in those places is that different forms of local government are coming to the fore. For example, in the Eastern Free State, Eskom has now introduced a different model of distributing electricity and collecting the money for it. So I think that's the way how we're going over time going to work our way through the mess of local government. There's no shortcut. Hopefully in the elections in October, we will get some changes, and some of them more unsavory people will get thrown out. But elections are messy and democracy is messy. That's the model we chose. We have to live with it.
JP, in terms of the general elections that are coming up, I think what's been interesting is to see maybe if there's been a change in perception or change in behavior by voters, especially following the COVID pandemic. Maybe what are your views? I know that pre-COVID, in some of the surveys that you'd spoken about in previous conferences, you mentioned that when it came to President Ramaphosa, he was very much still popular, even more popular than the current party that he belongs to. And of course, that also spoke to your point is, why you wouldn't see a party get rid of its leader because of his popularity. Maybe some of the temperature on the ground in terms of what we should be looking out for in the next coming elections.
Yeah, that's a question which you can hold against me in the future, or rather the answer you can hold against me. But here is my best guesstimate. I think the ANC will do fairly well. They will get more than 50% of the vote. I'm talking countrywide now. They may have a reasonable chance of getting back Pretoria or Tshwane and Johannesburg. I don't know about Nelson Mandela Bay. And I think the opposition parties in general are going to do worse. The DA in the last local government election in 2016, 5 years ago, got 27% of the vote. I very much doubt they will get that again. In fact, I can't see it. The EFF has not shown any progress on the 11% that they got in 2019, so they may be stuck at a kind of a plateau. Now, if your second and your third biggest parties are stuck at plateaus, then obviously the ANC will do, relatively speaking, very well. So I don't want to make predictions, but I think that's how I see the lie of the land. ANC just over 50, maybe even a little bit more, 10% thereabouts, 10, 15 for the second and third parties. And then the rest, particularly in local government, will go to an assortment of local parties, ratepayers associations, local civic groups, that kind of thing. I think that's more or less how it will play out. Mr. Ramaphosa is very popular. I think the ANC is popular. I think the anti-corruption drive in the ANC is resonating with voters. So they will probably do fairly well.
JP, I could certainly continue this conversation with you for a lot longer, but before I let you go, just maybe a quick comment from you. What are some of the things that continue to keep you awake at night? What are your biggest concerns or what you think South Africa is facing their biggest challenge in, say, the next year or year and a half?
For me, the two biggest ones would be, first of all, youth unemployment. And, we all know the unemployment numbers and so on. But the reality is that for all practical purposes, 50% of black youths, not 50% of the youth of South Africa, but 50% of black youths are unemployed. And that is a massive issue that we have to deal with. And we would have to look at much more than just the labor market to fix that. And the second one is an issue that the president himself has made a priority, and that's the capability of the state. The South African state is not a highly efficient machine, and that capability has to improve. Now, Michael Sachs in his session has made the very good point, for as long as you have segregation, it'll also be a struggle to improve the civil service. It's a very interesting take that he's got. But there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that can be done. And one of the critical things I think that must be done, and Mr. Ramaphosa has started with that, is to take away the authority from ministers, from political appointees, to appoint or dismiss director generals. The average tenure of a director general in South Africa is a little bit more than 2.6 years. Now, 2.6 years in a job, particularly in a difficult government department like Home Affairs or the police or education, is a ridiculously short time. So you've got to fix that. And once you start fixing the top, then hopefully the thing can percolate down over time. But I would put youth unemployment and the capability of the state, or rather the incapability of the state, as the two central concerns.
JP, thank you so much for your time this morning. Your insights are valuable as always. Of course, that is JP Landman. He's an independent political and trained analyst.